Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Rukia, Sui-Fong and Yoruichi? Part 1. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Before I take your live, I must commend you Sasuke for being the first being since the beginning of the Soul Society to force their way into the Ryumkick, Soul King Palace, and defeat the Zero Division. The figure talking was a pale-skinned demonic figure with extremely sharp jagged teeth, long white hair, black pupilless eyes with black toe and fingernails that were razor sharp. It wore a completely white robe and held a large razor-sharp dagger in its right hand that had blood dripping from its blade that belonged to the wannabe god that was lying on the ground with a pool of blood forming under him. Aizen glared at the figure that had given him such a grievous wound. What are you? I've already killed the Ryum, Soul King. Aizen asked, as the last time he had been here he never saw such a being before, nor was there any information about it either, and his question was to gain that information and to buy time for them Jyoku, breakdown sphere, to remove the wounds that his body had received. The being that was looking down at Aizen started laughing when he heard what Aizen had said, as if it was a joke. Foolish boy, what you destroyed was simply a conduit for the actual Ryums to be used through, as just by being in the presence of the true Ryum, any being that is made of Reishi will simply drop dead. Only someone that is equal in power could stand in his presence and live. And do you know what the funny thing about this is? Sasuke's in the being said as it lowered itself until it was eye level with Aizen, I am the true Ryum. The now revealed Ryum said, causing Aizen to go wide-eyed and gasp, which in turn caused the Ryum to chuckle. Aizen could only stare in complete and utter shock as the being that he thought he had killed was actually right before him and had wounded him before all of his anger came to the surface and started yelling out obscenities at him, only for blue Reishi to suddenly form around his mouth, preventing him from talking. Along with his arms and legs, then hoisted him into the air where his muffled screams could be heard while he was brought closer to the Ryum. All those centuries of manipulation, scheming, and plotting, and for what? To come so far only to be rendered incapable of finishing your job, and all without knowing the reason why you failed, the Ryum said, which quieted Aizen's muffled screams as he listened to its words. You may have gained power that is equal to mine. May have transcended beyond Shinigamis and hollows, but you forgot one thing in all of this. No matter how much you force yourself to evolve, you are still composed of Reishi, and that is something that I have complete control over. The Ryum said before it snapped its fingers, which opened a portal behind Aizen which sent out 4 beams that attached to his 4 bound limbs, and it started to pull him into the portal. It's a shame that, since you equal me in power, I can only bind you and send you to your death. Before it disappeared. The portal opened up in the world of the living in the middle of the destroy replica of Karakura town, and a still bound Aizen appeared where he immediately noticed a long section of black chain laying on top of a portion of a Taicho's Haori, and immediately knew the 2 individuals that those items belonged to. The Taicho's Haori belonged to Isen Kurosaki, formerly Shiba. And one of 4 opponents that he had personally killed, as they were powerful enough to be a threat to his plan. The chain belonged to Ichigo Kurosaki, and the only one whose power surpassed his, even while Aizen used him Jyoku to make him a transcendent being, but Ichigo Kurosaki had given him too much time to think, to understand. The act, and when Aizen realized that Ichigo's power surpassed his, he silently activated his Kyoka Sujetsu, trapping Ichigo within its Kanzen Seiman, complete hypnosis ability, and casted a Kurohitsugi, Black Coffin, with a full incantation, and combined it with his Kyoka Sujetsu, and made it seem like he was ranting on how powerful such a kid would be if he casted it while waiting until Ichigo's vision was blocked by his kid men walked over to the side and create an illusion of himself where he stood when he cast. Only for a second later, Ichigo shattered his kid. Only for a second later, he rushed at the fake Aizen and slashed his right shoulder. When Aizen saw Ichigo slash at his fake, a plane immediately formed in his mind. He made his fake appear on top of a nearby plateau, while he walked up behind Ichigo, using his Kyoka Sujetsu to hide his presence, while making his fake go off ranting some more, and at the end of his fake's rant, Aizen stabbed Ichigo Kurosaki in the heart with his Zanpakuto, and had one last talk with the only being that had the ability to defeat him, at least that's what he thought of at the time. Flashback. Aizen watched as Ichigo looked down at the blade that had pierced his heart, then looked back at him, where Aizen was able to see a small stream of blood coming down the side of his mouth, while his eyes widened. Aizen, wah? Aizen merely chuckled at Ichigo's question. Ichigo Kurosaki, for all that you've accomplished, for all of the power that you hold right now that it even surpasses my own, you have failed. You could have ended our fight the moment that you brought me out here away from Karakura town and your friends, but you believed that your newly acquired power would have assured your victory, and you would have been right. But you were too confident in your power and gave me too much time to think, and when I realized that your power surpassed mine, I activated my Kyoka Sujetsu and put you under its influence. Aizen told Ichigo, who did nothing but stare at him as he realized what Aizen said. Why didn't I feel your Ryatsu? At Ichigo's question, Aizen started chuckling. "I've been refining my control over my Reiatsu for centuries." "Well, you have only just acquired the ability to sense Reiatsu, and the only way you would sense my Reiatsu would be if I let you," Aizen explained to Ichigo while he brought his left hand over to Ichigo's right shoulder. Uchiha, the chain from his bankai wrapped around with a long portion dangling off of his shoulder, and grab the long chain before breaking it off. The chain from your bankai is easily recognizable, and it will let your friends know that you have died. Farewell, Ichigo Kurosaki. As Aizen said this, his Zanpakuto that was still embedded in his chest started glowing blue, and an instant later, Ichigo started screaming in agony as black motes of Reishi with a red outline started coming off of Ichigo's skin and floated over was absorbed into Aizen's skin. Every second that went by, more and more motes of Reishi, black Reishi, come off of Ichigo, and as more Reishi came off of Ichigo, his entire started turning black, and after his entire body was completely black, he let loose one more agonized scream before his entire body was turned into Reishi and was absorbed by Aizen, only for him to feel his power increasing to a level Aizen wasn't sure that the Gyokure had the possibility to achieve, and decided to head to Karakura town while thinking about his sudden discovery. Flashback end. While Aizen continued to stare at the black chain, he couldn't help but chuckle at that memory of Ichigo Kurosaki. He had the best and only chance at stopping him, only Ichigo Kurosaki wasted it by trying to prove his superiority over him instead of finishing him off. As such, he had defeated Ichigo Kurosaki and absorbed him, adding his powers on top of Aizen's, while ruthlessly suppressing his memories and personality, which inadvertently made Aizen think about the following events that lead to his current position. Flashback. When Aizen reached the town, he immediately headed towards the pass-out form of Isen Kurosaki while ignoring the late Ichigo Kurosaki's friends. Then tore off the Haori that Isen had bound to his right shoulder before decapitating him and used his special high movement to appear on the outskirts of the city and put up a massive hidden barrier around the city, preventing the inhabitants from leaving, but more importantly, for Aizen anyway, it prevented anyone from getting in, and now he was going to pay the world of the living a quick visit. As Aizen exited the Sinkamen world penetration gate, he ended up in the same spot that he had left with Jin and looked around at the destroy replica and saw that the Shinigami that fought against him were, with one exception, it appeared that Kisuke Urahara hadn't been as injured as Aizen had thought and was now up and moving. But Aizen set his thoughts on Kisuke's side and sensed the Reiatsu of Yamamoto and walked over to him, only to be pleasantly surprised by the fact that his Zanpakuto, Rikyunjaka, was laying next to his body as Yamamoto decided to temporarily abandon his Zanpakuto when Wanderweiss's Resurrection Extinguer sealed all of Rikyunjaka's flames, and for one brief moment, Aizen wondered how his Zanpakuto was by his side, as all of the Shinigami that were currently in the fake town were too injured to bring his Zanpakuto to him. Pushing that thought aside, Aizen picked up Rikyunjaka and laid it on top of Yamamoto's body before Aizen concealed both himself and Yamamoto with Kid before stabbing Yamamoto and repeated the process that Aizen used on Ichigo Kurosaki and turned Yamamoto into Reishi particles, and during this Aizen was surprised when Yamamoto didn't utter a single cry of pain or agony as Ichigo Kurosaki did. Along with his Zanpakuto, as Aizen didn't want to leave such a dangerously powerful weapon just lying around, especially with Kisuke Urahara, the only one that surpassed him, albeit in only a single area, was unaccounted for, and since he had absorbed Ichigo Kurosaki and his own power gained a significant boost. And while Aizen had absorbed Jinrikisai Yamamoto and Rikyunjaka, knowing that the power he gained from such an act would be nothing compared to the power he had even before absorbing Ichigo Kurosaki, he had respected the man and decided to allow the one man to witness the history of the Soul Society, to become part of a god, and when Aizen meet Kisuke Urahara once more, he would do the same to him, allowing the only being to surpass him in intelligence to be part of him as well. But until then, Aizen shifted his priorities to finding Kisuke Urahara. 1 year later. An entire year passed and still Aizen couldn't find neither hide nor hair of Kisuke, and after continually searching without any luck, Aizen decided to switch tactics and headed back to Wako Mundo, something which caused the Shinigamis that were still trapped their surprise and fear, which turned to despair when he informed them what he did to Ichigo Kurosaki and Jinrikisai Yamamoto, and allowed those that he trapped there to return to the world of the living, as there was nothing that any of them could do to him, with the exception of Arahime Inoue, but her spirit was broken upon being informed of Ichigo's death. It was when Aizen was in Wako Mundo that he decided that in order to find Kisuke Urahara, he would need to draw him out, and the best way to do that would be to assault the Ryumkik, Soul King Palace, as Kisuke was sure to appear in order to stop him from achieving his goal, but in order for that to work he would need to give Kisuke time. Not only to come up with and complete any new plans to try and stop him no matter how futile it would be, but to also occupy his time, and so Aizen decided to rebuild his forces, but this time decided against reforming his Espada ranks and instead focused on turning Jillians into a ranker. Now all Aizen need to do is find one of the many Uchihas that were created, but after seeing at the state of Las Notches, he was sure if there were any that were still alive, but it didn't matter if there were none, he would just make more. As it turned out, the humans and Shinigami that he trapped in Las Notches had gotten rid of all of his rancor, though that was most likely Kenpachi's doing, and it was during his search for any of his rancor that he came across the shattered corpse of Ridam Chelyut, leader and sole member of his exequias. And upon seeing form, Aizen decided to scrap his previous idea of collecting Jillians, as he knew Ridam's abilities, and decided to try an experiment with them Jyoku and his newly acquired level of power, and sent some of his Reishi into Ridam's shattered fragments, and willed them Jyoku to completely restore Ridam with couple of surprising results. When Aizen's Reishi made it to Ridam's shattered corpse, each of the fragments staring glowing before all of them turned into Reishi and converged on one spot and started to take shape, transforming, morphing until at last, it perfectly resembled Ridam to the last detail, with one difference: his mask, clothes, and his Zanpakuto all remained the same as his sealed form, but Aizen found his Reiatsu to be equal that of Nator Gilga, the former 5th Espada. After that Ridam had finished reforming, Aizen ordered him to enter his Resurrection, returning blade, Japanese translation, which he did without any complaint or question, which caught Aizen's attention, as it was basically expected for Ridam to ask some questions at his sudden revival, Aizen's appearance being radically different since the last time he appeared in front of Ridam. But there wasn't, he just stood there until he entered his Resurrection, where Aizen then ordered him to continually make soldiers until he ordered otherwise. Aizen watched as Ridam's soldiers continually to increase in numbers. He began to wonder just how large their numbers would get in order to properly destroy the Seretei, as even with Ridam's newly increased power, the soldiers that his Resurrection created didn't change at all, which meant that even unseated Shinigami could defeat them, and a Shinigami Taicho could defeat all of the unseated Shinigami in the Seretei single-handedly, and that was without using their Shikai, and with that Aizen could only wonder just what the number would be. A month had passed and Ridam's soldiers were in such numbers that they were able to cover all of the ground sand under the canopy of Las Notches, and Aizen decided that it was time to attack the Seretei and draw out Kisuke. Opened a Garganta and walked through it with his army following shortly behind him. Aizen walked out of the Garganta in the 1st district of West Rukongai, ironically in the same spot that Ichigo Kurosaki and his group first appeared in the Soul Society. In front of the gate, while he heard the sounds of the Seretei's alarms and decided to give them something to focus on, and Aizen raised his left hand and pointed it at the wooden gate before he sent out a simple Shakum, red fire cannon, that erupted from his hand in a wave of crimson energy and quickly raced towards the wooden gate, where it impacted and for an instant stood defiant against the onslaught of crimson energy before shattering like so much glass, left a trail of destruction throughout the Seretei. Aizen stood there as he watched the amount of destruction he could cause with a simple level 31 Harem way of destruction before he felt his soldiers had finally exited the Garganta and were standing around him waiting. Aizen made a motion with his left hand and all of the soldiers around him and in the Garganta rushed for the broken gate while he stayed behind to keep the Gargantuan open while he watched the soldiers tear through the Seretei, fighting and killing all of the Shinigami that was within their abilities that they came across, and they were able to stall the Fuku Taichos due to their seer numbers. But it was when they went up against a Taicho that their numbers counted for nothing, and to make matters worse, most of the Taichos in groups of 2, which surprised Aizen as they normally fought separately, but perhaps the size of his army forced them into such an action. After sensing that the Taichos were in groups, Aizen opened 3 more Gargantas, and after waiting a few minutes his soldiers started pouring out of those as well, and followed the other soldiers rushing at the gate, and it was with the 3 additional Gargantas and the increased amount of soldiers that poured into the Seretei that forced most, if not all, of the Taichos to activate their Shikais to compensate. Aizen wondered just how long it would take for his soldiers to take out the Taichos, but considering that his army forced 3 of them into their using their Bankais, even while his soldiers continued to pour out of the Gargantas, and he never did tell Ridam to stop making soldiers, it was only a matter of time until they all died, but then again, time was something that Aizen had in abundance. Suddenly yellow Zero shot through the air and impacted the barrier just above the wall made of Sekiseki, which immediately told Aizen that Halibal had survived the wounds he had given her, and someone had healed her, and was now aiding the Shinigami, which was something that he expected from her. But after everything that he had done, killing Shinigami indiscriminately, killing the Taichos, destroying the Seretei, the only question that Aizen wanted answered, where was Kisuke? Though looking at the destruction Aizen's army was causing also made him wonder where the Zero Division was. And it was with that thought that caused Aizen to look up into where he knew the Ryumkik was located and was cursing himself for not realizing sooner that Kisuke had been hiding in the Ryumkik, but then the simplest answer were often the hardest to grasp. And it was after learning this that Aizen suddenly closed all of the gargantas that he opened, trapping his soldiers to whatever fate awaited them, and he made his way to where the gate he destroyed stood and stopped before raising his left hand and aimed it at the Senzakik, Palace of Remorseful Sin, that was in the center of the Seretei, and used Harem number 88. Irikjekazoku Shinton Rame, Flying Dragon Striking Heaven Shaking Thunder Cannon, which fired titanic beam of electrical and spiritual energy that raced through the Seretei, and as soon as the high-level Harem touched the outer walls of the Senzakik, the explosion that it created was of such magnitude that it formed a mushroom cloud that expanded to such a size that it reached the top of the barrier that surrounded the Seretei, while its explosion tore through the Seretei, destroying all in its path, be it buildings, Shinigami, or Aizen soldiers. None were spared. As Aizen felt all of the Ryatsu from the Shinigamis vanish, he teleported himself over to where Karakura town was and noticed that his barrier was still up, which he expected, and took it down, where Aizen then started the process to make the Ken, King's Key, and watched as Karakura town started glowing blue with the inhabitants of the town yelling out in agony, just like with Ichigo Kurosaki. Before the entire town turned into Reishi and was absorbed into Aizen's right arm, creating a large glowing mark on it that looked like a scar. With the Ken now in Aizen's possession, he shot straight up into the air and tore through the 72 barriers that separated the Seretei from the Ryumkik and landed on the entrance to the Ryumkik, where he was greeted by one of the members of the Zero Division, Tenjum Karinji, where Aizen let Tenjum struggle against him as he had respect for the members of the Zero Division. Not only their power but what each of them represented in the history of the Soul Society, though with Aizen's evolution through them Jyoku, they would never be able to defeat him in a fight, but the chance to experience the Zero Division's abilities in combat was too good to pass. An hour hadn't even passed before Aizen was standing over the dead bodies of all of the Zero Division and was now standing in front of Kisuke Urahara, who had a grim look. Kisuke Urahara, after searching for you for over a year, you finally appear before me, even knowing the reason why. I am curious to know, why do you appear before me now? Kisuke looked at Aizen for a second before responding. I knew that after you fused with him Jyoku, that it would be impossible to beat you, and after you defeat and absorbed Ichigo and Jinrikisai Yamamoto's power, it became even more apparent, and that was why I've been in the Ryumkik for over a year coming up with a way to defeat you, and now all I have to do is keep you busy until it's complete. As Kisuke said this, he drew his Zanpakuto and activated his Shikai, ready to do anything that would buy time until his plan was complete. Aizen didn't know how long his fight with Kisuke Urahara went on, but he knew that the longer that it did, the more that his annoyance with Kisuke and his damnable portable inflatable Gigai, and as he destroyed another one, Aizen looked around and wondered just how many he destroyed so far. 100. 200. Aizen didn't know, but judging by the amount of remains that were all around him, Aizen was sure, but he knew that the number was high, and as much as he would love to simply find and absorb the real Kisuke, Aizen couldn't do that, as he couldn't tell the difference between the real version and one of Kisuke's personal Gigai, even after having them Jyoku evolving him to such a level. Of course that didn't ease his annoyance, which only increased as he popped another. Aizen could only let out a sigh and resigned himself to play pop the Shinigami scientist. Anger, pure unadulterated soul-searing anger, was rolling off Aizen in waves as he looked down on the beaten, broken, soon-to-be-absorbed form of Kisuke Urahara and the popped remains of the 6,666 inflatable Gigai that he had destroyed during his game. Kisuke Urahara, out of all of the enemies that have come against me, you have, most assuredly, become the most annoying and infuriating one. I could handle destroying 1,000 of your insufferable inflatable Gigais. I could even push my patience to 2,000, as I could imagine it a game. But over 6,000, even I have my limits on what I can take. It was at that point that Aizen stabbed Kisuke with his now glowing Reishi blue Zanpakuto, and so I'm going to do to you the same thing I did to Ichigo Kurosaki and Jinrikisai Yamamoto. Farewell, Kisuke Urahara. Aizen said to Kisuke as he was turned into Reishi and was absorbed into his being, and now the only thing he had to do was kill the Ryum, and he would finally accomplish his goal. Flashback end. Aizen was brought back to reality when he heard 4 individuals land in front of him, making him look up, only to be surprised by seeing Yoruichi Shimin, Sui-Feng, Rukia Kichiki, and Tear Halibal. But Aizen quickly got over his shock. Well, this is certainly a surprise. I wasn't expecting anyone to have survived my assault on the Seretei. Aizen said while chuckling, while acting like his current predicament was an everyday thing. The 4 women glared at Aizen, with one of them, including a growl at his relaxed attitude. We wouldn't have if it wasn't for the Ryum saving us and brought us here, along with something extra. The one that spoke was Yoruichi as she showed Aizen something that looked like an ordinary Zanpakuto, except for the eerily green glow that came from the markings that were etched into the blade that made Aizen worried, and given that he had transcended beyond both Shinigami and Hollow, that alarmed him. Yoruichi and Sui-Feng noticed the slight change in Aizen's eyes, and both of them smirked. What's the matter, Aizen? Is there something about this blade that worries you? Well, you don't need to worry about it for much longer. Yoruichi said as she walked closer and raised the blade above her head and held it in a reverse grip before stabbing it right where the Mjyoku. Aizen's eyes widened in absolute shock when he saw the Mjyoku actually split in half when the blade pierced it, causing cracks which then started to spread over Aizen's body, which alarmed and, even though he would never admit it, frightened him. And as he saw the cracks continue to spread across his body, Aizen tried to move his body, but found that it wouldn't respond, and he found out that he couldn't access any of his abilities. Yoruichi grinned and chuckled at seeing Aizen starting to panic. "What's the matter, Sasuke? Aizen can't move. Can't stop the cracks from spreading across your body. But I think you can figure out what's happening to you. After all, Kisuke did give his life to ensure that you were defeated." When Aizen heard this, his eyes widened when realization hit him. Yoruichi grinned when she saw Aizen's expression. "You figured it out. Kisuke designed this." Yoruichi indicated the blade that was still embedded in the Mjyoku to react to the person that kills him, and only that person, and so when you killed Kisuke, you created a weapon that kill only you. As Yoruichi finished speaking, the cracks that had been spread across Aizen's body had finished spreading and were starting emitting multicolored motes of light as Aizen's body was broken down into Reishi and circled the four individuals that witnessed the end of Sasuke Aizen in a small dome of light before disappearing in a flash of light. Hokage. It was the middle of the night in Konoha and in a rundown apartment complex in the red light district where one Naruto Uzumaki was living, a large flash of multicolored light could be seen coming from the windows by the shinobis that were on night patrol. Before a large explosion destroyed the complex and four figures appeared on a nearby building, with one of them carrying what appeared to be a large white oval over their shoulder before suddenly disappearing faster than any shinobi could follow. All the while the entire shinobi world was unaware of changes what such an event would bring. It was finally over. The nightmare that was Sasuke Aizen had finally passed the moment that Yoruichi had stabbed Aizen in the same spot as the Mjyoku, and as Kisuke had designed the blade the same way to only affect the one that took his life. If the wielder were to stab someone, then only the wielder was the only one that was capable of removing it. Which was why Yoruichi just taunted Aizen after stabbing him, knowing that he would be unable to remove the blade, while the other three did nothing but watch, but none of them were expecting was for multicolored motes of light to suddenly start circling around them, but the four of them only felt apathy. They had caused and witnessed the death of Sasuke Aizen. It didn't matter, nor did they care what happened to them afterwards. When the flash of light dies down, the four women look around to see that they were in a dome of light with tendrils of Reishi coming from each of them, failing about maddeningly until they connecting with the ones coming from the other three, only for their eyes to widen when they felt something leave their bodies, and a second later something different replaced it in their bodies before the feeling vanished, only for the four of them to suddenly impact on a floor and quickly looked around to see where they were, only for the sound of a blade piercing flesh to reach their ears, and looked to where the sound originated from to see a bed with a blade that was used on Aizen was impaled near the center of it. But when they got to their feet, all four of them saw a young man who looked to be about in his teens with strange whisker-like marks on each of his cheeks, lying on top of the bed with the blade piercing his abdomen. Upon seeing the sight, a large amount of multicolored light began to be emitted from the blade, a large amount of mysterious white substance starting flowing out of where the blade was connected to the young boy's skin and started to spread out over his body, similar to what Aizen went through at the start of his so-called evolution. But when the white substance made contact with the bed, the substance destroyed it, shocking all four women, and continued to form around the young man until it made a large oval when it suddenly started emitting a large amount of, again, multicolored light, where a second later a large barely detectable was suddenly unleashed that caused a large explosion as soon as it came into contact walls. All four of the women lowered their arms from their face in a reflexive defensive measure and saw that the ceiling and walls of the room were completely destroyed and the light show had died down, and dozens of questions were running through their minds, but any and all thoughts were pushed to the back of their minds when they felt dozens of unusual energy signatures heading directly to their location. Yoruichi was the first to act, grabbing the ovalinkest young man and disappeared in a burst of shunpo, quickly followed by two more bursts of shunpo and one sanito. And reappeared on top of a nearby building and looked around for a split second before all four of them disappeared, where all of them reappeared on top of the large wall surrounding wherever it was that they ended up at before using shunpo and sanito again, which allowed them to travel a farther distance than normal. After continually using shunpo and sanito, the four women located a cave to stop, rest, collect themselves and watch over the oval-encased young man, which is why a kid was used to make it look like the cave was empty and to hide their rear yoku from being detected. The four women sat down on the floor while Yoruichi placed the white oval on the ground before joining the other three and waited a few seconds before asking the one question that they were all wondering but didn't want to ask: so, what are we going to do now? At first silence met the question as each of them didn't have an answer before finally: no idea. When those bits of light started circling us, I wasn't expecting to live. The one to finally break the silence was Rukia, and after a second the other three silently agreed. That doesn't change the fact that we are here and alive, nor what is currently happening to the young man in that. Hannibal, for the first time since they arrived in this unfamiliar land, spoke while pointing to the wide oval, causing all of them to look at it. For a few seconds no one said anything before Yoruichi was the one to break the silence. I'll ask again, what are we going to do? Surprisingly it was Sui-Feng that answered. Until that breaks and releases whoever is trapped inside, we can only sit and wait. We're in an unknown land, populated by individuals with an energy that we've never come across before, the capabilities of these individuals and their numbers. Sui-Feng stopped speaking and brought her right hand up and leveled it with her face, and that's not even considering what happened to us and what the effects are going to be. After Sui-Feng had finished talking, the other three women said nothing as they agreed with her reasoning, and now they just needed to wait for the wide oval to break. After all, it couldn't stay like that forever. 1 month later. A month, a single Forsaken month had passed, and that damnable oval still hadn't broken yet, and their patience was almost out, with the exception of Hannibal's, as she was used to such lengths of inactivity, but even so the three Shinigami women could tell that even she was starting to lose her patience. Wide oval. Though over the course of the month the four of them had been able to learn more about not only individuals with a strange energy, but about the changes that happened to themselves as well. At first they expected that they would need to return to where they first appeared in order to see if they could obtain a viable source of nourishment, but after taking 3 days for any of them to feel the beginnings of hunger to claw at their stomachs, the four of them knew that whatever happened to them had apparently changed them in more ways than they had thought. Of course, when it became absolutely necessary for them to find a food source that they could consume, Sui-Feng volunteered to be the one that would head back to their arrival point and see if she could find anything that they could consume as food, and it was there that Sui-Feng discovered a second change that made itself known. When she came across some food, a feeling or compulsion told her to eat some, and at first Sui-Feng did nothing as she wasn't about anything based on a feeling or compulsion that just randomly appeared, but the longer that she did nothing, the stronger the feeling got, until finally she got fed up with it and took a chunk out of a loaf of bread that she took, and to her complete and utter shock she found her hunger dying away when it reached her stomach. While Sui-Feng was still shocked that she, a spiritual entity, could eat the food wasn't something that she was expecting, and before she could focus herself again, she found herself surrounded by 4 individuals wearing black cloaks with different animal-styled porcelain masks, and judging by how the 4 held themselves, and the fact that they had her surrounded told her that they were no strangers to combat. And although Sui-Feng was surrounded by people with access to an energy that the Seretei had never encountered before, along with unknown skills, she didn't so much as react, as she had been in far worse situations in her life. After quickly going over her options, Sui-Feng decided it would be best to simply take the 4 of the cloak figures out with Hakuta, white hits, and only use Kidman unless absolutely necessary, and used Shunpo to appear behind one of them and gave a quick chop on the neck to knock them out before turning towards the other 3 and aimed a kick at the head of one of them, where they dodged it by ducking under it only for an instant later. Her other leg shoot out from underneath the leg she used for the kick and connected with cloaked individuals, masked face sending the figure backwards and also shattering the mask. When Sui-Feng had knocked out one of the cloaked figures and started attacking a second one, the other 2 moved to attack her after she had just kicked one of their squad members in the face and shattered their mask and quickly charged at Sui-Feng, each with a pair of knives in their hands. Sui-Feng didn't do anything. She knew the last 2 were going to attack her the moment they started moving, but was surprised when she sensed the unknown energy flow into their legs, which allowed them to increase their speed and covered the distance between them extremely quickly, and it wasn't until the 2 cloaked figures tried to stab her with their knives that she made her move, and in a burst of speed that the cloaked figures couldn't follow, she disarmed them of the knives, used their outstretched hands to put feet on the ground, hit both of the cloaked figures with multiple debilitating strikes, threw one of them into the other, and gave one more hit that sent both of them flying through the air, and through a nearby wall, gathered up the food that she had gathered. Ripped the hoods off of one of the cloaked figures and put the food that she had gathered in it, before using Shunpo to appear randomly around the town, getting a bigger bag then more food. When she was finished, Sui-Feng had head back to the cave after making absolutely sure that she wasn't followed and informed the other 3 of what she had discovered, which surprised all of them, but the one that was intrigued the most was Hannibal, as what Sui-Feng had described sounded very similar to a Hollow's instincts and told them so, and when Sui-Feng heard that, she wasn't exactly pleased but didn't outright dismiss the probability due to what happened to them. After that, the 4 of them quickly realized that the amount of food that they needed to consume was reduced, which surprised them a little bit, but any thoughts on what the effects would be for them in the future was put on hold when a large loud crack rang through the air. The 4 of them looked over to the wide oval to see a large crack on its surface before it started to spread out, and then to the complete and utter shock of the 4, watching the oval started to expand and grow bigger and stopped when it was about to touch the ceiling, when it suddenly popped and sent out a large wave of foreign energy quickly spread out. harmlessly passing through any object that got in its way until it had covered the whole planet before spread beyond it. After the foreign energy wave had passed, the four women looked to see a young man with golden blonde, but it was the items that were embedded in the ground around the young man that shocked them, as they had never expected something like this to happen, as around the young man was three very recognizable, though one was different. Zanpakuto, and before anything else could happen, the young man on the ground had brought himself into a sitting position, with his eyes closed when they suddenly opened, causing the four women to gasp when they saw his eyes, as they looked exactly like them Jyoku before turning to a cerulean blue. The young man looked at the four women that were looking at him, before suddenly raising his right hand and pointed at one of the women and said Yoruichi Shimin, former 2nd Division Taicho for the Gate 13, shock ran through all four of them when they heard that. The young man ignored their reaction and continued on Sui-Feng. The current 2nd Division Taicho and the name of your Zanpakuto is Suzumabachi. Then moved his finger to the smallest of the four Rukia Kichiki, younger sister of Byakuya Kichiki, and member of the 13th Division of the Gate 13, your Zanpakuto is Sode no Shirayuki. The young man moved his finger to the last of the four and only other one that was dark-skinned Tier Halibal, former 3rd Espada and Mjyoku created Vasto Lord class ranker, your Zanpakuto is Tiburon, Sharker Imperial Shark Empress. After that the young man lowered his hand and was simply waiting for any one of the four women to respond. All four of the women were shocked as the young man that had taken months to awaken, after being encased in an oval made out of a substance that they were sure that only them Jyoku could produce, had suddenly told them who they were and the name of their Zanpakutos, with the exception of Yoruichi, when he had never met any of them until he had opened his eyes. So the only way he could have gained that knowledge was if he somehow gained the knowledge from Aizen, at least that was the only theory that made sense to them, but before they could ask him any questions they needed to at least know the young man's name, with Halibal being the one to ask what's your name. The young man said nothing at first, content to only stare at them for a couple of seconds, before a small smile appeared on his face. Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm guessing your second question is how I knew the information I told you. Naruto asked Halibal, where she closed her eyes and shook her head, causing Naruto to tilt his head in confusion, where Halibal said only one word, Aizen. When Naruto heard that he just chuckled, which made Halibal look at him again. Well, you're quarter right. Instantly Naruto had the undivided attention of the four women. I did gain that knowledge from Aizen, along with Jinrikisai Yamamoto, Kisuke Urahara, and Ichigo Kurosaki. Along with all of their powers as well. At that their eyes widened, as each of them realized the implications of what such a statement meant. Why do you think their Zanpakutos are in front of me? Naruto asked them before he grabbed the one Zanpakuto that the four women had no knowledge of except for this one. This Zanpakuto is from one of your group. At this Naruto got to his feet and slowly walked until he was standing in front of Yoruichi and held the Zanpakuto out for her, shocking her and surprising the other three women. Yoruichi looked at the offered Zanpakuto in complete shock, and for good reason. She already had a Zanpakuto, granted she was forced to leave it behind when she helped Kisuke and then forgot about it when she stayed in the world of the living for an entire century, so she wasn't able to retrieve it when she headed back to the Soul Society, but with Aizen revealing himself she had been unable to search for it, only to eventually end up here. That's impossible. I already have a Zanpakuto. Even if I don't have it and it was left behind, I can't take another. Yoruichi said to Naruto, even knowing that he already knew. I know that it was a part of the memories that I've you, but this is special. Naruto indicating the Zanpakuto in his hand. However, this one is different. This one is touched by the Riem. That bit of information floored them. As good as Kisuke is at inventing things, even he couldn't create something that would defeat Aizen when the Mjyoku was enhancing him, so the Riem assisted him and created this. It is unlike any Zanpakuto that has ever existed before, and as powerful as you are, it would be better if you didn't underestimate the people of my world. Naruto said to Yoruichi before he placed the Zanpakuto in her hands and walked back to where his Zanpakuto were. Now that the subject was brought up, just who are your people and what is that energy that they have? Sui-Feng asked Naruto, finally getting a chance to the question she's had ever since their group arrived in this world, and her own encounter with those four cloaked individuals just increased her desire to know. Naruto looked back at Sui-Feng and chuckled, the four of you were going to have to be told eventually anyway, so might as well get it over with now. That energy that you've probably sensed is called chakra. Chakra is created when a human from my world mixes their yin, mental energy, with their yang, physical energy, together in order to perform interesting and in some cases inhuman feats. Naruto explained as he saw that the four of them were quite intrigued at a people with such an ability. Sui-Feng looked at Naruto, her eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion. How do you know that information? Before the four of you arrived, I went to an academy that taught me how to access and use chakra, and when you guys arrived there was 6 weeks left until the graduation test could be taken. Naruto told them, where Sui-Feng nodded after a couple of seconds at finally having her question answered, and now she only needed to know what the limits of chakra were to come up with effect tactics if she or any of their group were to fight against people who wielded chakra. Rukia looked at Naruto, "You only have 2 weeks to get back to your training academy." Then at this Naruto looked at her with a raised eyebrow and slight confusion. "You said when the 4 of us arrived here, you had 6 weeks until your graduation test. You were in that oval for 4 weeks." When Naruto heard that, his eyes widened briefly when he heard that. "A month? Odd, I thought that it was longer." As Rukia asked Naruto questions, neither of them saw Hannibal looking at Naruto as she went over everything that he had told the 4 of them in her mind. The energy that the 4 of them sensed when they arrived in this world was called chakra and was residing in every single human that resided in this world. Had attended an academy where they could be trained to access their own personal chakra energy, all that information, and yet he never gave a name for the people that were taught how to access their chakra. Interesting. But any further thoughts on the subject were pushed to the back of Hannibal's mind as she focused all of her attention on Naruto's chakra and studied it intensely and found something that grabbed her attention. Underneath Naruto's own chakra, Hannibal found a different chakra signature. One that was far more potent and dark than Naruto's and filled with so much malevolence it was as if the chakra was made from it, something that even a Hollow's Ryatsu couldn't achieve. However, when Hannibal heard Naruto say that he was going to have to return to his village, the settlement that the 4 of them arrived in, which should be called a city due to the size, they continued to be trained on how to use his chakra and asked if they wanted to come with him, which immediately brought a question to the forefront of her mind. "If we were to accompany you to your village, what guarantee do we have that we will not be imprisoned?" Naruto turned and looked at Hannibal and chuckled. "You mean besides the fact that any one of the 4 of you could take on and defeat even the strongest fighter that my village currently has?" When they heard that, their eyes widened, and while each of them were confident in their strength, the knowledge of chakra brought an uncertainty to them as they didn't know what the capabilities of chakra were. But to hear that any one of their group could fight against the strongest fighter from Naruto's village and win was surprising. "Let's just say that the knowledge on all of you and where you come from isn't the only bit of information that I've obtained," Naruto said with a feral smirk on his face while tapping the side of his head. The 4 noted what Naruto said and filed it away for later, though the ominous remark at the end was unsettling and made them wonder just what he learned during his month-long encasement, but pushed any thoughts aside as they looked at one another for a decision on whether or not to go with Naruto to his village. While Naruto had told them that they could beat any of the village's fighters, they were still skeptical on that, and they already knew that they possessed the means of escaping without any chance of being followed, as proven by Sui-Feng's raid into the village and her subsequent return, where they sensed no one had followed her. After thinking through everything that they had learned, the 4 of them decided that they would accompany Naruto to his village, but warned him that the moment that anyone tried to imprison them, they would bolt regardless of how much destruction they caused or the number of people they killed, something which Naruto was fine with that, but right now he had something more pressing to attend to. How was he going to carry his 3 Zanpakuto? Naruto had no sash to which could hold either Rikinjaka or Benihim, and when he emerged from the oval, his clothing hadn't changed, something which he was disappointed in, as he was hoping that the Mjyoku would have, at least, given him an all-white Shihakishima, garment of dead souls, as when he was inside the oval and gaining information from Aizen, Yamamoto, Kisuke, and Ichigo. He was also going through their experiences as well, something that he didn't tell them as he wasn't sure how they would react or how much more information they could take, and after spending over 3,000 years worth of memories wearing a Shihakishima, not wearing one just didn't feel right, something that Naruto planned on fixing the moment he was back in Konoha and nothing was distracting him, which would be in the dead of night. But that was later. Right now Naruto was trying to figure out how to carry his 3 Zanpakuto. Naruto supposed he could let one woman carry one, but the problem with that was that Zanpakuto didn't like to be carried by anyone except their wielder, and that's not even counting how Konohagakure would react to them when they reached the village, and even though they didn't need it, Naruto didn't want to slow any of them down. As Naruto was thinking up a solution to his problem, he noticed something on the ground. It was a piece from the popped oval that encased him for a month. Naruto picked it up and immediately noticed that it wasn't stiff like a shattered shell was supposed to be, instead it was limp in his hand, like it was simply fabric. It was extremely odd, and when Naruto looked around he saw that there were numerous other pieces laying around and knew that there was enough to make a makeshift sash to carry his Zanpakuto, and so without further ado Naruto picked the other pieces up off of the ground and held them in his right hand and was about to tie them together, only to notice something strange had happened to the pieces in his hand. Grabbing a small bit from one of the pieces in his hands, Naruto then suddenly turned his hand, letting the other pieces fall, only for something unexpected to happen. Instead of numerous pieces falling to the ground, a long piece of cloth fell to the ground, surprising Naruto and the 4 women that were watching him. Naruto looked down at the ground where the end of the cloth was before he trailed up it to his hand. It was all one piece. It was something that couldn't be explained by natural means, but with knowledge of the Mjyoku, Naruto and the 4 women just accepted it. Now that Naruto had a sash to carry one of his Zanpakuto, he could head back when suddenly Naruto realized something and quickly looked at his Zanpakuto before looking all around him. Before he looked back to the Zanpakuto and wondered what he was going to do. They didn't have any sheaths. Naruto didn't even bother counting Zangetsu as it was capable of creating its own. Naruto picked up Rikinjaka while continuing to try and think up a solution to his current problem when the blade was suddenly engulfed in fire, surprising all that were watching only for it to increase when the fire started to solidify around the blade and formed a sheath after a few seconds. Naruto cautiously touched it to test the temperature, only to find it warm. After confirming that it was safe to touch, Naruto focused on the sheath itself and soon found himself in awe of it. The sheath was colored the same as flames, orange and red, and in such a way that it was easy to tell it was beyond a human's ability to make. The red and orange that made up the color were used in such a way that to anyone else, it would seem as if the sheath itself was made out of fire. Naruto looked at the sheathed blade a couple more seconds before he placed it in his oddly made sash and felt a small sense of completion at the feeling before turning to Beniham and wonder if there was going to be a repeat. Which turned out to be true as Beniham's blade was engulfed in a crimson energy before it solidified into a red sheath where Naruto placed on the back of his waist before Naruto picked up Zangetsu, and given the size of Zangetsu and his current stature, he looked completely ridiculous and looked at the changes to the blade. It still looks similar except the backside of the sword tip curved inwardly, its hilt was silver and had a small length of chain hanging off of its base, and after having viewed Ichigo Kurosaki's memories and Naruto had to admit the changes gave Zangetsu a much better look. After Naruto looked at Zangetsu enough and was about to move it when a large amount of cloth suddenly materialized and wrapped around the blade, as is per usual, and without even stopping at what happened, Naruto placed Zangetsu on his back in a way that wouldn't interfere with Rikinjaka when drawn. Only for a red light to suddenly appear. The second Zangetsu was placed on his back when an instant later a new weight was pressing into Naruto's right shoulder, causing him to look down and saw a red strap similar to Ichigo's version, but much thicker. Now having everything Naruto needed, he turned and walked out of the cave with Rukia, Sui-Feng, Yoruichi, and Hannibal followed shortly after him, and the group headed towards Konohagakure. As the group of 5 walked towards Konohagakure, Naruto knew that it wouldn't take long before one of the 4 women to ask a certain question. Turned out Naruto was right. 5 minutes after they started walking, it was Sui-Feng that asked the question, which didn't surprise Naruto one bit. You said that you gained information about use, correct? Naruto nodded once to Sui-Feng's question. Does that also include our abilities? Another nod, including how to use abilities that any Shinigami could use if they have the capability. Another nod again. Then why are we walking instead of just using Shunpo to get there? Naruto looked at Sui-Feng and saw that she had a small frown on her face, which caused Naruto to smile a little. Excellent question, and yes, well, I do have the information and knowledge on how to suppress my Ryatsu, how to preform Kidm, Zanjutsu, Hakuta, and home skills. I have never personally or physically performed any of those skills before or even knew they existed until the 4 of you arrived, and as such, if you wish we speed our arrival up, I will need assistance, which will more than likely result in me being carried to our destination. At that, Naruto gave Sui-Feng a sly grin. Unless of course you already knew this and asked me, because one of you will have to carry me. What's the matter, Sui-Feng? Afraid I'll cope a feel? Naruto said to Sui-Feng while wiggling his eyebrows suggestively, causing Sui-Feng to gain a small blush and a surprised look on her face before she grit her teeth and glare at Naruto. The other 3 women that were watching Naruto and Sui-Feng talk were surprised when Naruto suddenly teased Sui-Feng, something which caused Yoruichi to laugh as she thought she was the only one to do that and decided to join in as she wanted to have some fun too. Well, Naruto-kun, if you really want someone to carry you, I'll gladly carry you, Yoruichi said in a flirting manner designed to fluster people. Unfortunately for her, Naruto had Ichigo's memories, or more specifically one memory of her. Nice try, Yoruichi, but did you forget I have Ichigo's memories, particularly the one where you first revealed yourself to him? That one in particular gave him some interesting fantasies. After saying that, Naruto looked at the 4 women and noticed that Yoruichi, Sui-Feng, and Rukia were looking at him in surprise and shock, probably from saying Ichigo and fantasies in the same sentence and in that order, which caused him to chuckle internally while Zangetsu to laugh his ass off. Is there something you want to say? Yoruichi was the first to respond in an extremely eager manner. You said Ichigo had fantasies, what were they? She asked as she was very interested in what the prudish strawberry had fantasized about. Naruto only grinned at first and wondered exactly what their reactions would be. Well, there was one where he found a stray cat in the middle of a downpour in the middle of winter, brought it back to his house so it wouldn't die, then in the middle of night the cat suddenly transformed into you, but with cat ears and a cat tail, and you proceeded to reward him for saving you. Naruto stopped talking when he saw the 3 Shinigami's reaction. Sui-Feng's face was red while she gritted her teeth and her hand was clenched and shaking from anger of anyone thinking of her Yoruichi-sama in such a way. Yoruichi was staring at him in shock before it gave way for a large grin to spread across her face. Probably finding that she was the cause of Ichigo having perverted fantasies hilarious, and Rukia was currently doing a very good imitation of a tomato with how red her face is, and judging by her shocked look, she wasn't expecting Ichigo to have perverted thoughts. Naruto looked over at Hannibal and saw that there was no reaction to what he said, which was what he actually expected. Ichigo and Hannibal had never met before, and she didn't have an understanding of who Ichigo was, and to top it off she was used to males saying or acting in a perverse manner when around her or any other female hollow. Naruto looked at Sui-Feng. After looking at Hannibal to see if she had any sort of reaction, he saw that she was about to blow and decided to reveal some more shocking news. "Why are you so mad, Sui-Feng? Don't tell me you're jealous that Ichigo had fantasies of Yoruichi. Well, you don't have to worry." Naruto chuckled when he said that as if he just told himself a joke. "He had a couple involving you." When Sui-Feng heard this, all of her anger disappeared and turned into shock, alongside Yoruichi and Rukia, at the thought of Ichigo Kurosaki having fantasies of Sui-Feng of all people, and considering that the two of them barely interacted with the other, just seemed impossible, and yet they were told the opposite, but that didn't mean that they believed him. "You're lying." Naruto chuckled at Sui-Feng's response, as he could understand the reason behind it. "Well, in a sense you're right, Ichigo didn't have fantasies about you, his hollow gave him the first couple, then his own hormones took over." When Sui-Feng heard that, she started let loose a string of curses and promises about what she would do if that hollow were to ever show its face to her, and some of what she was saying was enough to surprise him. Naruto looked over at Yoruichi and saw that she grinning and laughing at the situation and probably at the thought of Ichigo and Sui-Feng together, which was hilarious in and of itself as confirmed by the Zanpakuto's chuckling at the thought, and Naruto swore he saw a ghost of a smile on Juhabok's previous form. Then looked over at Rukia and saw that she had a blush on her face and a sad look in her eye. "What's wrong, Rukia? Sad that Ichigo left you out? Well, don't be. Ichigo had, well, quite a few involving you." At this, Rukia's entire face lit up, though why there was one with you and Sui-Feng in it I'll never know. At that, both of the aforementioned glanced at the other with their eyes locked, only to quickly look away embarrassed. Of course, after Naruto revealed that little bit of information, Yoruichi pounced on the chance to tease one of her former students and the younger sister of Byakuya, but unfortunately all good things must come to an end, which came in the form of Hannibal as she looked at Naruto. "Is this the reason you want us to walk to your village, so you could tell us about the perverse fantasies that Ichigo Kurosaki had?" Hannibal said to Naruto, and while her voice was still neutral, there was a hard edge to it. "No, though entertaining as it is, the reason we're walking is so I can tell you about the village we're heading to and my situation regarding it, on top of what the four of you should and shouldn't do during our stay there." When Naruto said that, all four of the women's attention was directly on him. Even the teasing that Yoruichi was subjecting Sui-Feng and Rukia to had stopped. Seeing their focus on him, Naruto continued, "More than 90% of the village hates me and wants me to die, with a number of attempts to accompany with it. The number of people that are actually nice to me can be counted on one hand, and I'd still have fingers left over. In short, almost all of the village hates me and the feeling's mutual." This confused the women, and they were wondering why they were heading to a village that he hated and where most of it in turn hated him. "If that is true, then why are we headed to a place that you hate and most of its inhabitants hate you in turn?" Hannibal asked as she was having trouble thinking up a reason as to why any human would willing go to a place that had made attempts on his life. Didn't make sense. "Because it suits my needs for the time being, the same reason why Aizen stayed in the Gate 13 for as long as he did." The last bit of information didn't surprise any of them, as they all knew what type of person Aizen was during their war with him. Now getting to what you can and can't do when inside the village. First off, do your absolute best on not killing unless you're attacked with lethal intent. Second, you can use each of your respective abilities, though please try and limit yourselves to the less destructive ones if possible. And third, don't describe your techniques or abilities to anyone that you're not teaching. Are these acceptable to you?" Naruto asked the women and received a nod from each of them a second later. The four women didn't have any problem with the rules that Naruto had laid out for them, seeing as how they were going to do that anyway, though there was something that confused them. "Why would you tell us not to describe our abilities or techniques to anyone? All of our abilities require Ryuryoku, and from what I've sensed, none of the people we've come across have a sufficient Ryuryoku level to even make an attempt, so I ask again you once more. Why tell us this?" Hannibal asked, as of all the things that Naruto had said to them, this one was the most confusing. Naruto didn't say anything at first and just looked at Hannibal. "If she's asking me that, then the shinobi that they've encountered so far haven't used chakra in order to fight them. That is, if the shinobi even had a chance before they used Shunpo or Sanito to leave." Naruto thought, but decided against explaining, as he knew that when he entered the village, the Hokage would be alerted to his presence and send an Anbu to retrieve him, in which they would have to use Shunshin to appear in front of him and then use it again to leave, which would require the use of chakra. Your question will be answered when we get to the village, though I could demonstrate the reason behind my question, but that wouldn't prove much of anything considering my unique position, so until then you'll just have to wait until a human that can use chakra demonstrates for you. Of course what Naruto had said had only confused Hannibal as to what he meant by his position, and waiting until a human that was taught to use chakra demonstrate didn't make much sense to her either, but for now she decided to drop the issue as she had no context as to the specifics on what Naruto was referring to and wasn't able to think up a sufficient argument to convince Naruto to talk. But her musing was interrupted when Naruto started talking again. I think that's enough of the explanations for now, and I'm pretty sure some of you are tired of walking so much, so it's time to speed up our arrival to the village, so who wants to assist me? Naruto asked with a sly smile on his face which the four women caught and two of them blushed as Naruto's smile reminded them of their earlier conversation and were starting to wonder if there was going to be a problem, but it was solved by Hannibal moved until she was next to Naruto where she placed her hand on his shoulder and just an instant before she used Sanito Naruto wrapped his arms around her waist as the group disappears in their respective techniques. The group of 5 appeared within sight range of Konohagakure's front gate and the next instant Hannibal looked down at Naruto, who still had his arms around her waist with a raised eyebrow only for him to stare back at her and kept his arms around her waist for another second before he let go and gave a small smirk as he saw that she was still looking at him with a raised brow. What? I didn't do anything inappropriate to you and besides how many men can say they gave you a hug? Naruto said to her and all it did was simply confuse her. Naruto turned and looked at the gate of Konoha and a feeling of anger rose up in him at seeing the last place he wanted to be, but it suited his needs at the moment, time to figure out how to use his Shinigami, Quincy, and Hollow powers, along with taking the time to talk with each of the Zanpakutos. And the Kyuubi, though that last one he was going to wait on, but the more that Naruto stared at the gate he couldn't help but wonder if this was what Aizen felt every time he looked at the buildings of the Gate 13. Though Naruto did view over 3,000 years worth of memories, he, however, didn't get their feelings or thought something, which he was grateful for as it made the entire experience as if Naruto was watching a movie, granted a movie that had the possibility to last more than 3,000 years, but a movie nonetheless. And didn't interfere with his own emotions, and as such he could judge each individual based on their actions and reactions to situations. But Naruto pushed those thoughts aside, where he would reflect on them later, as he starting walking towards the gate, where the 4 women followed shortly after him, and when they came within the sight of the 2 gate guards, being identified as Kotetsu and Izumo, one of them, Izumo, quickly turned to the other, said something, before the other one, Kotetsu, did a single hand seal and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. When Naruto saw the hand seal he looked behind him and saw that the 4 women had stopped and were looking at Kotetsu in shock, and he could understand why. When Kotetsu made the hand seal his chakra started to increase, but it wasn't his chakra level that shocked them, it was the fact that his Ryuryoku levels were increasing that shocked them. But it was more than the simple fact that a person's Ryuryoku increased, it was the fact that a still living human was consciously increasing their Ryuryoku, and while Shinigami, Hollow, or Quinces could easily do this, but to see a human that had no knowledge of any spiritual powers whatsoever being able to raise their Ryuryoku level at their choosing wasn't something that any of the 4 were prepared to expect. The 4 women looked at Naruto with an expression that basically said why didn't you tell us, and before any of them could ask any questions a person appeared wearing an animal-styled white porcelain mask, similar to the ones that Sui-Feng confronted, black clothing, a grey flak jacket, metal arm guards and gloves, open-toed sandals, and a sword that was strapped to their back, and a second later Kotetsu had reappeared next to Izumo, before the masked person walked towards Naruto's group until they were a few feet from them. Naruto Uzumaki, I have been ordered to escort you to the Hokage. Naruto looked at the masked individual and snorted internally as he already knew what the aged leader wanted, to find out what happened to him, where he went to and the kicker, who the 4 women that were with him were. But unfortunately for the aged man he wouldn't be getting any sort of answer that would satisfy him, not only because Naruto now knew the reasons for the Hokage himself to personally assist him with certain problems in his life, but also the fact that the Naruto that the Hokage knew, technically, no longer exists. Thanks to the accidental transference Naruto not only gained the powers, but the attributes from Jinrikisei Yamamoto, Kisuke Urahara, Sasuke Aizen, and Ichigo Kurosaki, with the exception of intelligence from Kisuke and Aizen. Instead all of Naruto's own mental faculties were increased, and with the experience of over 3,000 years, the old Naruto was long gone, dead, buried, and body turned to dust, but no one except for him knew that, but Naruto decided that he would need to change that, starting with the Hokage. Alright, but I'm walking there since I don't know Shunshin, and there's no way that I'm going to have you going to take me there, Naruto said as he walked past the gate guards and Anbu, with the 4 women following behind him, leaving behind him 2 confused guards and 1 confused Anbu. The Anbu looked at Naruto's figure as the young man's group walked away and was thinking over how Naruto acted and compared it to the last time he had seen the blonde Jinchuriki and the general opinion of Konohagakure and immediately noticed a stark difference from the before and after. Naruto from before was dim-witted, shouted about becoming Hokage, played pranks to get attention, and had this warm friendly air around him, but the Naruto he had just met, the after, was like a completely different person. His eyes held an intelligence and cunning quality at such a level that the Anbu had never seen in a child before, but the biggest difference was the air around Naruto. It had changed into one that was filled with some mysterious power that felt wild and immensely powerful. Whatever it was that changed the boy was drastic, that the Anbu knew as he jogged after Naruto to keep him in eyesight. As Naruto and his group walked towards the Hokage tower, Sui-Feng had moved until she was walking along beside him. "Why didn't you tell us that they could raise their Riryoku?" Sui-Feng whispered harshly, as she knew that he knew from the beginning that the people who could use chakra could raise their Riryoku. She just wanted to know why. Naruto looked at Sui-Feng and gave a small chuckle. "Would you have believed me if I did?" The question stopped Sui-Feng, literally, as she stopped walking for a second before she resumed while thinking on what Naruto's question and quickly came to the conclusion that she more than likely wouldn't believe him due to thinking that it was impossible for a human to do such a thing. Then she wondered why didn't he just show her instead of going through all of the trouble of waiting until they ran into human that could use chakra, but gained the answer almost immediately. All of the power that he had gained would make any demonstration to them meaningless. Sui-Feng was brought out of her thoughts when she saw that they had arrived at the Hokage tower. Not they, the four women knew that, where the Anbu then lead them inside until they stopped in front of a door, where after the Anbu knocked on the door, they heard an aged male voice say enter. The Anbu opened the door and the four women walked in first to see a dark-skinned old man that had spiked gray hair and 3 lines running from the corner of his eyes that reached down to his cheeks, a wart near his left nostril, and a liver spot on his face, and the four women knew not to judge a person based on appearance, especially a person that looked like an old man. Inrixai Yamamoto was a perfect example as he was likely older than all 4 of them combined, yet his strength surpassed all of theirs. When Naruto walked into the room, the aged Hokage looked at him with wide eyes at not only seeing him for the first time in a month, but also because of the 3 swords, with one being big enough that the old man was wondering how Naruto was able to walk with that thing on his back, and after looking at Naruto for a couple of more seconds, finally decided to speak. "It's been a while, Naruto. What is it that you wanted to speak to me about, you old piece of shit?" Naruto said to the old man, which surprised everyone in the room, while the 4 women that were with him looked at Naruto curious as to why he was talking to what appeared to be the leader of this village. Hiruzen Seretei, the Sandaime Hokage, looked at Naruto in shock at what Naruto called him, and while he was used to Naruto calling him old man, as he used it as a term of endearment, but he never had anyone from his village call him a piece of shit to his face before. "Naruto, why did you call me something that someone your age shouldn't say, let alone know?" Seretei asked Naruto as he wasn't about to let anyone get away with saying something like that to him off scot-free. "Because you are, you old piece of shit," Naruto said as if it was as obvious as saying that humans needed oxygen to live. "And what reason could you possibly have to believe that?" Seretei asked as he found it hard to believe that over the course of a single month, Naruto had changed in such drastic way that he figured certain things out about his life, but even with that thought he still felt a great swelling of doubt build up inside him. "Because you lied and tried to manipulate me for the past 12 to 13 years. Naruto bluntly told Seretei, causing his eyes to widen, while the 4 women looked at the old man intently for any sign that Naruto's words were true, and judging by the old man's reaction, there's some truth to Naruto's words, which was something that none of them liked. Seretei looked at Naruto in shock and worry at what Naruto said to him, as it indicated that he had figured what his plan was concerning Naruto, but right now Seretei needed to know how much Naruto figured out and what claims do you have to support your accusations. Seretei asked Naruto as there was no way that he was just going to outright admit to lying and trying to manipulate a 12 to 13-year-old boy, regardless of who they are, even one in a special situation such as Naruto. Naruto just looked at the old Hokage as if he was stupid, but considering what the man was trying to do right now, Naruto could believe that in his old age, Seretei's mind had left him alright. "Let's just assume we know nothing and look at your action, shall we? You as the Hokage are the most powerful shinobi in the village, and its leader suddenly going out of your way to help a homeless orphan that has no relation to you, and the entire village hates and despises him, and you just happen to give him a place to live out of the kindness of your heart while visiting him occasionally to direct him down a certain path. One that would leave him as nothing more than a weapon for this village, to be used and thrown away when he became completely useless." Naruto briefly stopped talking and looked at the old man and saw that he was wearing his poker face, making it impossible to get a reading on his emotions. But Naruto was able to sense the old man's Ryukyu, and by what Naruto was feeling, Sarutobi was panicking at what he had said, where Naruto decided to add on to Sarutobi's panic before he had a chance to talk or think his way out of his current situation. But that's not all. Oh no, over the coming years and numerous visits to the orphan boy, with either you going to spend time with the boy or… In the more frequent case, the boy would come to you, and you would tell him false tales of what being a shinobi was like, such as saving the daughters of the daimons and rescuing entire countries, and during all of those visits, the boy continually asked you why everyone hated him and who his parents were, but you only told the boy in various ways that you didn't know but you did. You knew that the reason the boy was hated was because he is the Kikbijinch Kriki and that his own father sealed it inside of him. Now what was it about you thinking that you weren't a piece of shit? Naruto finished talking and simply waited for the old man to respond. Right now Sarutobi was panicking so much that he could barely think in a coherent manner as he tried to figure out how Naruto discovered all of this. Finding out about the Kikbi was only a matter of time and wasn't that much of a concern to Sarutobi, but the fact that Naruto had discovered the reason behind his interaction in aid was, and normally he would never to manipulate anyone of such a young age, his choice was the lesser of two evils. The other option was to leave him completely alone, where Danzo would be able to convince Naruto and turn him into nothing more than an emotionless weapon that was to fight and tossed away when it became useless. Sarutobi's way, at the very least, was to silently guide Naruto along a path that would allow him to become a shinobi and be loyal to Konoha of what he would believe would be his own choice, and as much as Sarutobi hated himself for taking that path, he's the Hokage, it is his duty and obligation to protect his village by whatever means necessary. Even if it meant he became disgusted with himself afterwards. Naruto looked at Sarutobi in silence waiting for him to respond, but in the past 5 minutes Sarutobi only sat there looking out into space and was more than likely trying to figure things, but really what did the old man expect, that he would just stay stupid and ignorant for his entire life, which would allow him to get away with his actions, like hell he would allow that to happen. But for now Naruto needed Sarutobi to actually focus on something else. What's taking you so long, you piece of shit, trying to think up a lie to tell me? Naruto said to Sarutobi with a small smirk on his face. Sarutobi was snapped out of his near panic attack when Naruto had spoken and refocused his mind to his current situation and lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry Naruto, what you said is true, and my actions say that I've lied and tried to manipulate you, and I've regretted it ever since. Naruto said nothing at first as he just stared at the old man while examining his Ryukyu and was a little surprised to find out that he actually was regretting his actions, but even so, Naruto wasn't about to let the old bastard get away with his actions without some form of reparation. Words are cheap, actions speak louder. If you're truly sorry then you'll stop keeping secrets from me, such as why didn't you tell me that I was the Kikbijinch Kriki? Naruto said to the old man as he was curious to what Sarutobi's answer will be. I wanted you to grow up like a normal child. Explained Sarutobi, although he knew at the time that the chances of that were slim to none. Funk you. The moment that you told the entire village of my status that became impossible. Naruto spat at the old man as he couldn't believe just how stupid and naive the old bastard was being, or maybe it was that he still didn't believe that he was different from the Naruto he had in his memories, even though he had already proved that he wasn't. You need to drive the point home, the actions of the entire village, and you have proven that you don't want me here, so maybe I should just give everyone what they want and leave. Sarutobi was deeply ashamed at what Naruto first said, only for his eyes to widen at what he said next, and he started to try and think of a way to get Naruto to change his mind, but he couldn't think of anything except for bribing him, and that was something that he didn't really want to do as he was unsure of what Naruto would accept. So he would have to deter Naruto from the choice. Don't you want to be Hokage, Naruto? Sarutobi asked, and while he hoped for a yes, he knew that the answer would more than likely be a no. Naruto acted like he was actually considering Sarutobi's question when he suddenly let loose a laugh that was inhuman and cold. Become the leader of the very people that have tried to kill me, and one of its previous leaders lied and tried to manipulate me. Do you take for the same stupid pathetic fool I was more than a month ago? Naruto said to Sarutobi in a cold tone that progressively became colder. Sarutobi flinched at Naruto's tone, surprised that such a young child could speak in such a voice, and Naruto's response was exactly what he feared it would be. To Naruto, the village didn't deserve his protection, and judging by the words that he used, might even consider destroying it himself. Nevertheless, Sarutobi had to ensure Naruto didn't leave. If you leave, I would have no choice but to put a substantial bounty on you to have you brought back, considering what you are. When Naruto heard that, he started to chuckle and then gave Sarutobi a very sinister smile. You won't do that for fear of the other villages finding out what I hold, and when they find me, which they will, I'll happily go with them, considering that none, from whatever village they're from, have done anything to me. Sarutobi sighed at that. Naruto, please, don't make me have Anbu arrest you. Normally he wouldn't go through with his threat, but considering Naruto's demeanor so far, he may have no choice. Not a very good threat there, you see the women with the twin braids. Naruto pointed at Sui-Feng with his thumb. She was able to take out a squad of Anbu, well they only got off one attack before they were decimated. So, got a better threat to throw at me. Enough Naruto. No one's dying today. Seretei said firmly. Naruto had made his point. His ploy had failed and now he had to resort to the absolute last thing that he wanted to do today. What would it take to keep you here? Seretei asked with a sigh. Naruto just stared at the old man for a while. He gave up. I'd thought he would be more stubborn about this issue. Naruto thought before he talked. Every last piece of paper that this village has on Genjutsu, sealing techniques, and something that will fix my Bushin issue. Seretei at first was concerned when Naruto said he wanted everything Konoha had on Genjutsu, as that particular shinobi technique was considered the most powerful, only to flinch when Naruto mentioned his Bushin issued and had figured out that Seretei knew of his problem but did nothing to help him. Very well, the necessary material will be gathered and given to you on the condition that pass the graduation exam this time. You have to understand Naruto that Genjutsu is widely considered the most powerful of shinobi arts and it's forbidden in all of the villages to give a civilian and until you're a genin, I can't give you that information, but I can give you this immediately. Seretei said and pulled out a scroll and tossed it to Naruto, who opened it up and read the contents. Kage Bushin. And what exactly are the specifics of this? For starters, it's far more chakra intensive to perform and it creates solid copies instead of illusions. No ordinary genin could hope to be able to use this technique. Seretei said to Naruto while intentionally keeping the unique aspect of the technique a secret in order to keep Naruto from permanently hurting himself. Naruto looked at the old man with slightly narrowed eyes as he knew that he was keeping something from him by his Ryukyu, but decided not to do anything about it as it just add another notch against them. Fine, that's acceptable for now, if you'll excuse us the five of us will be leaving. And without giving Seretei a chance to stop them, all of them used Shunpo and Sunito to disappear. Naruto's group appeared outside of his apartment where he let them in before closing the door when Hannibal suddenly spoke up. I believe it's time you told us what exactly happened when you were in that oval. Hannibal's question gained the attention of Rukia, Yoruichi, and Sui-Feng, where all of them looked at Naruto. All the while Naruto was looking at Hannibal, and even though he knew what she meant, it would be better for everyone involved as she was specific. It would be better if you were specific in this case as a lot happened during that month. You said you gained the knowledge and powers of Jinrikisai Yamamoto, Kisuke Urahara, Ichigo Kurosaki, and Sasuke Aizen, and yet you only have 3 Zanpakutos, none of which are Kimka Sujetsu, so I'll ask you again, Naruto Uzumaki, what happened during the month-long period where you were encased in the oval created by them Jyoku? Naruto looked into Hannibal's eyes and saw that they held an intensity that was rare for her, before moving on to each of the other 3 women, and saw that they each held a similar intensity to Hannibal's. Very well, I was going to tell you anyways, I just didn't want to overload the 5 of you with too much information too soon. Naruto said to the 4 of them, where after a few seconds gave a slight nod accepting his response. Didn't mean that they had to like it though. Flashback. White, that was all that Naruto could see around him, nothing but pure unadulterated white, and it was the only thing that he had seen after waking up to find a blade piercing his abdomen, where a second later a large amount of multicolored light started to emit from the blade, and a second later his apartment exploded suddenly. Naruto didn't know how long he had been in this strange place, but he knew that he needed to get out of here, as he had to graduate from the academy to become a kick-ass shinobi and become Hokage. Suddenly something about the white around Naruto had changed, as if in response to Naruto's desire, and started to shift and change into a place that Naruto didn't recognize before. Suddenly hundreds upon hundreds of years worth of memories, perhaps even thousands, started to fill his mind at such a fast rate that he passed out without having a chance to feel the pain such a sudden influx caused. Naruto woke up after an unknown amount of time passed and held a hand to his head as it gave a dull throb as he sat up and shook his head. Oh, I hope I never have to do something like that ever again. Naruto said when suddenly 6 individuals appeared around him, causing him to look up and see the Zanpakuto spirits of Zangetsu, Rikinjaka, Benihim, and Kyoka Sujetsu, and standing next to Zangetsu was the source of Ichigo Kurosaki's Quincy powers, the previous form of Juha Bak. Well, now this is interesting, the 6 of you personal coming to see me, I feel honored. Naruto said to them, being completely serious about being honored, having those 4 Zanpakuto come out to personal meet him, it was hard not to be, and he had a good idea as to why they were in front of him. At first not one of them said anything for a couple of minutes before the Quincy power manifestation spoke. What do you plan to do with the power you have attained? Naruto looked at the manifestation for a couple of seconds. Well, that depends on what all of you do. Seeing a confused look come over all of their faces, Naruto continued, let's say I give you a response that all of you accepted, what would all of you do? After asking, he saw a surprised look replace the confused one. At first none of them said anything and just looked at one another before the manifestation looked back at him. Your answer would decide it if we would allow you to use our powers, well your actions would decide it if you are worthy of continuing to use our powers. Naruto only gave a small grin when he heard that. Good, that's an answer that I'll gladly agree with, and as for the question you asked before, I'll use my new powers to protect the people I care for and destroy the people that try and harm them. Naruto said to them while growling out the last part, which made the group of 6 looked at one another. The 6 of them looked at each other for a couple of seconds before the manifestation looked back at Naruto. We have deemed your answer acceptable. Naruto had a small smile on his face when he heard their answer. That's good to hear, cause I don't want you to try and repeat what you did to Ichigo Kurisaki's Anjetsu. Naruto said this while looking at the middle-aged man, letting him know that he knew of his actions. But I do have a question. During the time where all of that information was being dumped into my mind, how much time passed? Unfortunately, the passage of time is different here, and you do not have to worry. We both agreed that we don't want to ultimately be responsible for the death of our wielder for a second time. Naruto wasn't really surprised at that, but it would have been nice to know. At least that's reassuring, and it would have been nice to know, but I have been wondering. Do the 6 of you learn anything about me? Naruto asked them as he was curious as to what each of them did when he was experiencing learning about them and their world. Yes, we did. Oh good, that means we can go straight to there then. Naruto said as he raised his right hand into the air and snapped his fingers, and the surroundings changed to where the 7 of them were in front of an extremely large cage that had a single large piece of paper that had seal written on it in kanji, and a second later a large menacing crimson red eye with a slitted pupil looking down at the new arrivals. Naruto looked up at the Kyuubi for a second before looking at the piece of paper before floating up to it and placed a hand against it and studied the chakra composition that made up the seal before Naruto found something that made his eyes go wide, where he reached up and grabbed the top of the piece of paper and started to pull down, only to be stopped when a hand suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the cage. Naruto looked at the person that pulled him away from the cage and felt a surge of anger course through his system and immediately lashed out with his left hand, rolled into a fist and slammed it into the side of the person's head, catching them by surprise where they dropped Naruto. Before his right fist connected with the person's stomach and sent them flying into a nearby wall, where a second later the person cried out in pain as 2 swords had pierced their hands, and an instant later a sword embedded itself in the person's chest, making them cry out in pain again. Hello father, Naruto spat as if that word was nothing but poison. Minato Namikaze looked at his son in shock and pain from the 3 swords currently piercing his body, at how he already knew who he was, and the way that he said father. Minato instantly knew that his son wasn't exactly happy to see him, and before he could say anything his son suddenly appeared right in front of him and viciously tore the sword that was embedded in his chest out, causing him to yell out in agony with a thin trail of blood going down the side of his lip. Naruto was staring at his so-called father in absolute hatred as he was looking at the source of all of his pain that he had experienced at the hands of Konohagakure's inhabitants, and he was going to savor everything that he was about to do. You must be wonder how I knew that you were my father. It wasn't that hard really. Our appearance are too closely similar, not to mention that our Reiatsu signatures have more than a 60% match, but enough about that. You have something that doesn't belong to you and something that I want. Without warning, Naruto suddenly plunged his left hand into Minato's chest before harshly ripping out his left hand that now had a large red orb that was the size of a basketball. In his palm a minuscule portion of the yin half of the Kyuubi's chakra, and now Naruto plunged his right hand into Minato's chest and ripped out a large bright blue flame that floated above his palm. Your Ryuryoku that contains everything that you've ever experienced in your life, and the best part about it is, the body that you have right now is composed of nothing but chakra, and without this Naruto brought his right hand and held it in front of Minato's so that he could see his Ryuryoku chakra is unable to maintain its stability, and what that means for you is your body will start to destabilize and revert back into physical and mental energy, though I wonder how long that will take. Naruto's question was about to be answered as even before he finished talking Minato's skin was starting to distort and blue and red bubbles began forming, surprising Naruto as he hadn't expected the destabilization to happen that fast, and apparently Ryuryoku was far more important to chakra stability than he previously thought. And the only reason Naruto even knew that was because after he had been forced to experience the memories of Kisuke, Aizen, Yamamoto and Ichigo, he was suddenly transported to a large white room and was looking at a large dark blue orb that took Naruto a second to realize was chakra, and spent the next unknown amount of time studying it with his newfound knowledge about Ryuryoku, and learned during that time that without Ryuryoku chakra couldn't exist, and it was when Naruto removed the Ryuryoku from the orb of chakra and watched it break apart into hundreds of red and blue orbs did he realize that Minato Namikaze was in agony as he felt his entire body start to break apart and he looked to his son and couldn't help but wonder why he was doing something like this to him but couldn't speak due to the amount of pain coursing through his body. Naruto watched as his father's body was slowly being broken down and saw that he looked directly at him with a certain look in his eye, which caused Naruto to smirk. I bet I can guess what's going through your head right now. You're probably thinking, why is my own son doing this to me? Well, you see, that is a question that is easily answered. You see, both of my parents died, so I had to grow up without any parents, and because of that I didn't form any sort of attachment to anybody that would allow me to see them as a parental figure, and in short, at this point, Naruto raised his index finger and pointed it at Minato. You may be my father by blood, but I don't consider you my father in any way, shape, or form. Naruto watched as Minato looked at him in complete shock before his head dropped down, probably from having his spirit broken at having his own son tell him that he didn't consider his father his father. As Minato's entire body was broken apart, he held up the blue Minato's Ryuryoku before he squeezed his hand, and the blue flame started to change shape and solidified to form a book that was titled Minato Namikaze. Naruto tossed a large red orb of the Kikbizian chakra into the air where it stopped in midair, and Naruto snapped the fingers on his left hand, and everything around his group began to chance and turned into what looked like the inside of a library with a long table with a single book on it appeared in front of him. Naruto waved his left hand over it and the book flew open and a number of pages before it stopped on an unmarked page, and Naruto placed the blue Ryuryoku flame on the blank pages where it sunk into the page, and words suddenly formed on it before shutting itself, and with one more snap of his fingers, the book flew off of the table and into an empty spot on one of the bookshelves. Naruto snapped his fingers once more and transported his group back to where they first met and turned to look at the group. Now I have one more question for all of you. The group of Zanpakutos looked at one another before looking back at him, and Zangetsu shrugged once before nodding. I suppose that you all know of chakra. Naruto saw all of them nod. Would you agree to allow me to use chakra with each of your Zanpakutos? The Zanpakuto looked at each other again and had a silent conversation with each other as they discussed with each other as if they should allow Naruto to use chakra with each of their Zanpakuto blades, and while normally they would have said no, but their current wielder had access to an energy that they had never encountered before, and since they were created from Naruto's Ryuryoku in this instance, and thus they wouldn't be adversely affected from his own personal chakra, and so with that in thought, we agree to allow you to use your chakra with use, but you must first conduct a test to allow us to see the effects your chakra would have on us. All of us are prepared to undergo such a test. Naruto nodded and was about to say something when the white around them had a crack appeared and Naruto's body started to fade. Well, looks like we'll have to continue this another time. It appears I've been asleep this entire time. Until next time then. Flashback end. That's what happened when I was in the white oval. Naruto said to the four women who were looking at him with wide eyes and were acting a little cautious with him. Not surprising considering he had just finished telling them that he had actually experienced over 3,000 years, though now that that's out of the way I believe it's time that we talk about what happened to the four of you during your trip here. The four of them were surprised that the conversation suddenly turned to them, where Sui-Feng was the first to recover, and what exactly are mean by that? That's easy to answer. Each of your Ryatsu has a different signature when I compare them to the ones that are in the memories that I've gained, so that means that something happened to each of you when you were coming to this world, so. Naruto said while motioning with his right hand to Sui-Feng for her to explain. Sui-Feng looked at the other three women where they looked at each other for a couple of seconds before each of them nodded, where Yoruichi then nodded to Sui-Feng, who then looked back at Naruto. Very well, on our way to this world, something reached inside of us and took some part of us only for something different to replace what was taken, and for the entire month that you were in that oval the only things that we figured out were that we need to eat less often and that it takes longer for us to require sleep. Naruto thought over everything that he was told, was disappointed that that was all they found out, though Naruto understood the reason for a little bit of information on their changes. A child was suddenly and unexpectedly stabbed by the very blade that killed and absorbed Aizen, who in turn killed and absorbed the powers of Yamamoto, Kisuke, and Ichigo. And had all of its power transferred to the child, so trying to find out what happened to them easily took a back seat when compared with that. Alright, it's not much, but considering your situation it's completely understandable, so in order to gain more insight let's start with the most obvious. Tearhalable said woman only blinked when Naruto singled her out, as she had a good guess as to why out of your group she is the only ranker. Furthermore, she's the only Mjyoku created a ranker that's now in existence. But to get to my point, let me ask you all a question. What's the difference between an Aranker's Zanpakuto and a Shinigami's? The four women looked at Naruto like he was an idiot, and considering that he had just finished telling them he had gained over 3,000 years worth of knowledge of their world, it was expected before they started to think about the differences between each of the Zanpakutos before stating their answers. The Shinigami Zanpakuto has two stages, Shikai and Bankai, while in Arrancar's only has one was Rukia's response. The Shinigami Zanpakuto can be repaired if it's broken while in Shikai, but if it happens when using Bankai, it's impossible to repair it, while if an Arrancar's is broken, they permanently lose the ability to enter their Resurrection, with Sui-Feng response and Arrancar's Zanpakuto is the heart of their power, and by releasing it their true form and power is released to the world, while the Shinigami Zanpakuto is a separate power unto itself was Yoruichi's response, but it was then that Hannibal realized the reason that Naruto had them do this. You believe that what happened to all of us changed us, so that we're more similar to each other. Such as my Zanpakuto changing to be more like a Shinigami's. Naruto watched as the other three women looked at him in surprise, each of them wondering if that was true. I don't know how each of you were changed, I just picked you Hannibal, because you are the sole ranker in the group and thus easier to guess what changed about you simply by comparing the differences between rankers and Shinigami. After he said that, Naruto watched as each of the four women looked at each other for a second before they looked at themselves, trying to see if they could see or sense the changes that happened to them. Naruto waited a couple of minutes before he saw that the four of them were now looking at him. I believe that all of you will discover whatever changed about you through time, but for now all of us need to focus on the present and what all of us are going to do. When the four women heard that, they looked at Naruto, a little confused, causing him to sigh a little. All of us need to train our abilities, me so I can build my abilities back up to what they were and then surpass the levels, and you four, so you can increase the level of your abilities while also training me in the use of mine. The last thing that Naruto said caught the women's attention. Why would you need us to train you? You have the complete memories of two people that attended Shin Academy, and one that created it, and one that spent however long with hollows in Hueco Mundo. What could the four of us possibly teach you? Yoruichi asked as she was the first one to react to what Naruto had said. You mean besides getting to know each of you better? The four women looked surprised, but quickly changed to skeptical. It would be better if all of us were to stay together. My people are highly observant and bipedical when it comes to anything that'll gain their attention, and all avowed abilities will defiantly catch everyone's attention. So it would be better if all of us were together when we train, that way there would be 5 different individuals present, and 5 times the chance that we would sense the presence of anyone that spies on us. The four women looked at each other once more before their attention was drawn back to Naruto when he started speaking again, and I am being serious in wanting to get to know each of you better. The only thing I have on any of you is from someone else's perspective. Besides, I would at least like to have one person that I could call a friend. Naruto said while mumbling the last part. However, it was loud enough for the four women to hear, which caused them to look at him, and a second later Hannibal decided to speak up. Very well, your reasoning is acceptable, however there is one thing I would like to know. Naruto nodded his head, one signaling her to continue. What did you mean by saying you are the Kikbijinch Kriki? Naruto looked at Hannibal before he let out a small sigh. To be honest, I was kind of hoping that I would have been able to explain it to the four of you over the course of the next 2 weeks, but it might be better this way. Now I want the four of you to try and imagine a creature that was so powerful that the only way to defeat it was to seal it away, but over the course of time, it quickly became apparent that the creature's power was at such a level that it couldn't be sealed inside of an object, so instead it was sealed inside of a living being. When Naruto had said that last part, all four of the women's eyes went wide as they instantly made the connection. So that means that you have a giant creature made up of nothing but chakra sealed inside of me in order to stop it from destroying Konoha, and because of that almost all of this village hates me for it. Naruto said, finishing what Hannibal was saying before he let out a yawn. Interesting, it appears that I'm tired, but I guess that isn't unexpected. Naruto began as he walked towards where his bed was before he stopped. There's still 2 weeks before the academy's graduation exam, and if it's alright with the four of you, I would like to spend that time train in my new abilities. Of course it goes without saying that I want to spend that time getting to know each of you as well. Was the last thing that Naruto said before he went to bed, leaving the four women alone to talk among themselves. For the next 2 weeks Naruto had been training with a Shinigami and a ranker in using his abilities, and he hadn't once stepped foot into the academy, and instead he had used that time too with his group, while those that weren't teaching him were training their own skills, while at least one of the group would keep their senses alert for any possibility of being watched. And broke into a few clothing shops during the night to get a completely new wardrobe and made sure that it was the Shinigami Shihakishima, or at least the closest thing to it. Over the course of the 2 weeks it became glaringly obvious to all of them that they were being watched by Anbu, something that Naruto wasn't surprised considering who he was and how he recently acted, and a number of cloaked people that resembled the Anbu were watching them as well. Sui-Feng wanted to eliminate them immediately, but Naruto was able to persuade her to wait until it was dark. That would follow the 5 of them no matter where they went, but finally stopped when both Yoruichi and Sui-Feng took care of their stalkers when night finally fell. When Naruto woke the next day he realized that it was the day of the graduation test, which meant that if he wanted to gain all of Konohagakure's Genjutsu knowledge, he would have to actually go to the academy and pass the test, something that Naruto still hated thinking about. And was currently walking towards the academy and walked towards the building with Rikinjaka and Benihim safely placed in his sash. Sadly he left Zangetsu behind, as he was going to be interrogated simply for having those two Zanpakuto with him, and Naruto didn't really feel like explaining why he had such a monster-sized sword on him. As Naruto continued to walk down the street, he easily noticed the hate-filled glares sent his way, and just as easily ignored them, and hurried his way towards the academy, in order to get, in Naruto's own opinion, the pathetically pointless test in order to get information that he shouldn't have to threaten to get access to, and as Naruto walked into the classroom, he saw that there were a few other kids already there, and they were staring at him in confusion, something which caused him to internally chuckle. Ignoring the kids that were staring at him, Naruto sat down in a seat that was at the back of the class, and waited as over time other students continued to enter the room and sat down, where they also looked at him in confusion. Where both of the teachers walked in together when the room was almost full of students where they both saw Naruto sitting in the back and were confused for a second before they spotted his whisker marks, before their eyes widened in surprise when both of them saw that Naruto wasn't wearing his trademark jumpsuit. Naruto continued to stare straight ahead, giving no sign that he saw the two teachers looking at him, when in actuality he was sensing how their Ryoryoku was reacting to seeing him after he had a month-long absence, and what he found was slightly surprising. Haruka was actually happy to see him again after so long along with being a bit confused at his choice of clothing. Mizuki was angry at seeing him which was overshadowed by a malicious happiness at Naruto's reappearance, and decided he would need to wait and see what he would do. Naruto just sat in his seat while tuning out what the teachers were saying and only paying attention when the graduation test was mentioned as anything other than that didn't interest him. Though when a piece of paper was suddenly placed in front of him made Naruto realize that the graduation test was starting, and it was here that Naruto needed to decide if he would reveal the new him to the graduating class or wait until later to do so. Naruto sighed internally, such a hard decision, he thought amusedly. After taking a couple of seconds to think it over, Naruto decided to go about it the shinobi way and make everyone think that he was still the same Naruto from over a month ago, and wrote Ramen to every question on the test and simply waited for the test to end. Unfortunately, the speed at which he stopped caught the attention of the teacher's attention, causing Rukia to walk up to him and grab his test and look it over before lowering it, and decided to make a spectacle. Naruto Uzumaki, would you like to explain what you did here? Naruto looked up at Rukia, along with everyone else in the room, and wondered why he was doing this right now. Completed my test, which is the reason behind tests, correct Rukia-sensei. All of the students went wide-eyed at hearing Naruto, the joke, dope, baka, and dead last, finished the test before anyone else even got halfway through theirs. No, I want you to explain why you answered every single question on the test with Ramen. When everyone heard that, they started laughing at Naruto when they heard what he put for answers on his test. Naruto simply shrugged and said, I was hungry, it was the only thing I could think of. Naruto's response only caused the students to laugh harder and causing Rukia to sigh and mutter back after being gone for more than a month, and this is the first thing he does, and before Rukia could say anything else Naruto interrupted him, even if you give me another test, I'll just answer it the same. Why is the one in your hand? Rukia looked at Naruto in surprise as he wasn't expecting him to respond in such a manner. Naruto, what's? You're still here? I thought that after having my test and me personally saying I'm not going to change my answers would have been enough of a clue for you. Guess I was wrong. Naruto said to Rukia and simply sat and waited for everyone else to finish their own tests. While Naruto went back to waiting for the others to be done, Rukia looked at him for a couple of seconds before he slowly started to make his way down to where he was originally and stood there trying to come up with a reason as to how Naruto changed so drastically in such a short amount of time. Naruto sat in his seat and watched as the other students finished their tests, where the teachers proceeded on to the next portion of the graduation exam, which Naruto repeated the same stunt he did with the written exam, but it was when the taijutsu portion came up that Naruto decided to mess with everyone's minds, not to mention that his evaluator was Mizuki. And when his match started, he waited until Mizuki was near him before Naruto used a Hakuta technique that made Mizuki spin in the air behind him. When everyone that saw that tried to get an answer, Naruto only laughed at them and simply waited for the next portion of the test to begin, while ignoring any further questions until everyone gave up on trying to get an answer and wonder exactly what decision he was going to make regarding it. He had already acted like his previous self during the test and then revealed he was different from what everyone was expecting him to be, and if he revealed his true self once more, it would tell those that were actively watching him that his old self was nothing more than a mask, which they would be right, but not the way they would expect. He used to deceive everyone and would then have their subordinates spy on him even more than they were now. And ever since Naruto changed over a month ago, it had been something that he had been waiting for, a chance to show all of Konoha that he wouldn't take any more shit from them, that he does things his own way, and to show them a glimpse of what real power is like, though by that particular time, there would be nothing that Konoha could to stop him from doing anything that he wanted. Naruto was broken out of his musing when he heard his name being called, making him stand and walk down to where Rukia was, where he led him to a separate room where Mizuki was sitting at a table that had a large number of hit-I-8 and walked until he was standing in front of Mizuki, where Rukia sat down next to Mizuki. "Alright Naruto. For you finally test, I want you to do the Bunshin no Jutsu clone technique," Rukia said to him while holding up a clipboard. Naruto rolled his eyes at that, being asked to create a Bunshin of all things, it was almost insulting, but Naruto would comply with the request if only to see their reaction at what he was about to do. Moving his hands in a cross shape and said Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and a cloud of smoke exploded around him before quickly dispersing, revealing 3 more Narutos, leaving both Mizuki and Rukia wide-eyed and their jaws hanging open in shocked surprised. Rukia could only look at the 4 Narutos before he was able to collect himself. "Naruto, where did you the information on how to do the Kage Bunshin?" "The Hokage gave me the information personal." "And why would the Hokage personally give you such information?" When Naruto heard Rukia ask him that question, he dispelled the 3 clones that he created and stopped for a split second as he registered that he had 3 different points of view. "Well, that's interesting," was his only thought before he spoke, because that bastard funked with something that he shouldn't have. Naruto's response left both Rukia and Mizuki more shocked than when he used the Kage Bunshin Jutsu before Rukia collected himself again. "Naruto, how dare you disrespect the Hokage like that?" The scared teacher yelled at Naruto as, well, he was used to Naruto always never giving the Hokage the proper respect. This was taking things too far, and it was with this instance that made Rukia wonder just what had happened to Naruto during his month-and-a-half absence to change him this much. Naruto smirked at the 2 teachers. "Maybe you should talk to the bastard to get some answers, but before that, do I pass or not?" Naruto asked the 2 teachers in a bored tone. Rukia was snapped out of his thoughts when Naruto started talking and, after looking at Naruto for a second, then turned to Mizuki, where they both started to whisper to each other, and then Rukia then brought his clipboard and motioned at it, but Mizuki shook his head and whispered something to him, where a second later Rukia sighed and nodded slowly before he looked back at Naruto. "After we deliberated, it has been decided to that have passed, if barely, so here is your hit-I-8, congratulations, you've passed," Rukia said before he grabbed one of the hit-I-8 and tossed it to Naruto, who caught it with his left hand and walked out of the room. Naruto was standing on a nearby roof in the dead of night as he watched Mizuki jump out of the Hokage's mansion with the forbidden scroll on his back and knew that this was why Mizuki had approached him earlier with that pathetic attempt to get his help earlier. After Naruto had received his hit-I-8 and walked out of the room and sat down while ignoring all of the other students' questions on how he had passed. And after school had been let out, Mizuki had approached him and told him that there is a secret second test, and if he agreed to take it and complete the test, then it would be a lot easier for him to be promoted to Chunin, where Naruto said no and used Shunpo to disappear high into the air, directly above where Mizuki was standing, and waited until Mizuki had left. Naruto had followed after Mizuki, while making sure to stay completely outside of Mizuki's ability to detect him, knowing that he had something planned and that it originally involved him. Naruto now just needed to follow Mizuki until he personally revealed what his plan was. And after seeing Mizuki come out of the Hokage mansion with the forbidden scroll, Naruto only had one thought: Mizuki isn't smart enough to come up with something like this. So who's holding your leash? But Naruto's attention was drawn back to Mizuki when the man started move away from the mansion where Naruto followed after him, and after a while sensed that Rukia had started to follow after them, something which caused Naruto to silently groan. "Why did you have to join us? It would have been so much faster with just me and Mizuki," Naruto thought before he used Shunpo and disappeared once again. Naruto reappeared in a forest that was a little farther ahead of where Mizuki was heading, which was the only section of Konoha that had a forest leading from the large village wall into the village interior. In order to escape, but Naruto's attention was brought back to Mizuki when Naruto sensed that he suddenly started to slow down just as he entered the boundaries of the forest, which Naruto quickly realized that Mizuki either sensed Rukia or he was too impatient to wait to see what was in the forbidden scroll. Either Mizuki simply sped up his fate that much faster. Naruto used Shunpo to appear on a branch in a tree that was close enough for Naruto to see Mizuki, who was currently in a tree, but far enough away where he wouldn't be spotted, and watched as Mizuki began attacking Rukia the moment he entered, catching the scarred man by surprise. With kunai and shuriken that became embedded into Rukia's body and would have made his death a sure thing if it was any other instance. In this case, Rukia was lucky that Naruto was nearby watching everything unfold, as Naruto decided to finally intervene when Mizuki removed one of the giant shurikens that he had on his back and threw it at Rukia. And it was exactly right when Mizuki threw the shuriken that Naruto disappeared in a burst of shunpo. Naruto reappeared directly in front of the shuriken and an instant later drew Rikinjaka and cut airborne shuriken in two, where the force from the spin of the airborne weapon forced the two parts to go in two different directions and also revealing the cut surface to be glowing red hot. All the while Naruto was staring directly into Mizuki's wide surprised eyes. Well, fancy meeting you here, Mizuki. Been having a nice night? I would hope so, considering that you snuck into the Hokage's mansion to steal the forbidden scroll, which was something that you tried to trick me into doing. Mizuki's eyes widened when he heard what Naruto said. What did you just? In order for your simple mind to understand what I just said, allow me to simplify it for you. I was completely aware of your intentions towards me the moment that you walked into the classroom earlier today, but it was when you tried to convince me to help you, which was a completely pathetic attempt by the way, that I realized whatever it was you were planning it would involve me taking the blame. Naruto looked at Mizuki and saw that he was looking at him with an wide-eyed shock. How am I doing so far? Mizuki was finally able to snap out of his shock and grinned sinisterly at Naruto. Well, I'm surprised that you were able to figure that out, considering how much of a baka you are. As a reward, how about I tell you why everyone hates you? 12 years ago. If you're talking about how the Yondaime Hokage sealed the Kyuubi in me, I've known about particular bit of information for more than a month now. Interrupted Naruto in a calm tone. Both Chunin's were shocked that Naruto knew the secret. Naruto just waited while wondering how long it would take someone with such slow mental faculties, such as Mizuki, to finally come to grasp with what he said. So the demon finally regained consciousness. That'll make killing you all the more enjoyable. Mizuki said, finally getting over his shock. I knew that you were slow, Mizuki, but the fact that you mistake me for a 90-foot-tall fox with 9 tails suggests that I'm vastly overestimating your intelligence. Naruto replied. Iruka was looking at Naruto completely perplexed at what was happening before him. He knew that something had happened to Naruto during his month-long absence from the village. One didn't need to spend the amount of time with a blonde-haired boy that he had to figure that out, and it wasn't just the new clothes that he was wearing or the weapons that he mysteriously procured. There was an aura around him that radiated nothing but power and danger, giving Iruka the impression that he was staring at the strongest person to exist. The very fact that the village hasn't been destroyed and we're having this conversation right now would suggest that I'm the Kyuubi's container, rather than the fox itself. It's Genjutsu 1021. You should be sent back to the academy for that mistake, mocked Naruto. Sick of being insulted by the demon brat of all people, Mizuki did the only option his mind could think of: time to die for real, demon. And threw a barrage of shuriken at Naruto intent on killing him. Iruka saw the shuriken and knew that no matter how much Naruto changed, he wouldn't be able to block all of the flying projectiles Naruto run. Naruto simply stood there and watched as the barrage of shurikens came closer and simply said, back at number 81, dank, splitting void. A large translucent rectangular well suddenly formed in front of Naruto and blocked all of the shurikens and left both Mizuki and Iruka in a state of shock once again. Naruto looked at Mizuki's expression, then looked behind him to see Iruka's and started to chuckle. So Mizuki, do you have something else planned to use against me, or do I get the pleasure of ending? Naruto stopped for a second, trying to come up with a word that would accurately describe the current situation, before shrugging. Whatever you would call the situation. Mizuki, brought out of his shock by Naruto speaking, gritted his teeth and growled before he removed a giant shuriken from his back. Naruto looked at the shuriken in Mizuki's hand and had only one thought: compensating for something, which caused him to try and hold his laughter in, but failed to do so, confusing Iruka and Mizuki. Naruto held his hand out in front of him as a signal to wait as he caught his breath. Sorry about that, but seeing you carry around a giant shuriken made it seem like you were compensating, Naruto said before he resumed laughing. Mizuki reacted exactly how Naruto thought he would, in angered stupidity. Naruto looked up to see Mizuki's face completely red in rage, gritting his teeth, and was shaking before he snapped and only said "I" and threw the giant shuriken at Naruto with all of his might. Naruto simply stood there and watched as Mizuki threw the shuriken, completely forgetting that his kid was still active. So you gave me the option of ending this, wrong choice, Naruto said as he waited until the shuriken impacted on his kid before he disappeared in a burst of shunpo and reappeared beside Mizuki, raised his left foot into the air and kicked Mizuki out of the tree he was in, while simultaneously removing the forbidden scroll that the traitor had slung over his back. Naruto simply watched as Mizuki impacted the ground and flipped the forbidden scroll around before setting it down on one of its end right next to him, just as Mizuki stood up and looked up at Naruto in shock as to how he was able to get to him with such speed that was of such a level that Mizuki didn't even know that Naruto appeared beside him until he was kicked out of the tree. But to Naruto and Mizuki none of that mattered right now. For Mizuki, he was trying to decide if he should get the forbidden scroll back or simply get away, but one thing was certain, he was going to kill the demon brat regardless. For Naruto, he was trying to decide if he should allow Mizuki to continue to think he would be able to get away or simply end the situation here and now. Whatever Naruto decided though, he would have to do it while Mizuki was attacking him, seeing as he was charging directly at him with one of his kunai. Naruto watched as Mizuki came charging at him. He quickly made the decision to end this right now, and so Naruto waited until Mizuki had used Shunshin to appear right in front of him, before he raised Rikinjaka up near his left shoulder, then suddenly appeared directly behind Mizuki, in a lunging motion, and Rikinjaka fully extended out in front of him and glowing bright red. And the next instant Mizuki suddenly combusted, the force of which caused Mizuki's body to separate into two at his waist, and showing that Naruto had completely cut through Mizuki's body. Rukia stared at Naruto in horror and shock as he watched Naruto just kill Mizuki in a way that he had trouble understanding as to how, and act like killing someone was an everyday thing for him, and while Rukia knew that Naruto's life in Konoha wasn't anywhere near easy. What Naruto experienced in his life so far shouldn't have had such an effect on him to where he doesn't even react to killing someone for the first time, right? Naruto turned around and watched Mizuki's dead body burn until it was turned into nothing but ash before looking up and saw that the forbidden scroll was unharmed, which disappointed Naruto a little as he wanted to see how the village would have reacted to having that burned, but Naruto simply did away with those thoughts as he knew that this was just the beginning. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.